Your assessment of Operation Sindoor, you've been studying Operation Sindoor, we've spoken about it, but you flew down to India to be able to assess Operation Sindoor. What have you found out?
One thing I've learned in my studies is that you have to get on the ground. You have to talk to military leaders, political leaders, even media to know what was happening then.
The armed forces had them in their target list even earlier. The political clearance never came to hit Bahawalpur and Murid. It's in the heart of Pakistan's Punjab province. I mean, that's striking the heart of the enemy.
Of course, you want Pakistan as an institution to stop with the proxy war of the terrorist organization.
Was Operation Sindoor a true red line for Pakistan in your appreciation?
I do.
Will the Pakistani military leadership think twice, thrice, 4 times before it attempts another Pahalgam?
I think so. They'll definitely think through their decision making. Will that give up the institutional basically support as you see Pakistani generals attending terrorist funerals and making very problematic statements?
Hello and welcome to an India Today special broadcast. We are on the Chakravyuh Podcast and my guest today is very special. He is a combat veteran, an academic, an author, the chair of urban warfare studies at West Point, and the difference between other academics and him, he travels to the battle zone on ground and then forms a picture and an opinion. Welcome, Colonel Spencer, for being a part of the India Today Chakravyuh Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to meet you in person, and your coverage has been amazing.
Thank you very much. Your assessment of Operation Sindoor, you've been studying Operation Sindoor, we've spoken about it, but you flew down to India to be able to assess Operation Sindoor. What have you found out?
I learned something every day. And I've learned that one thing I've learned in my studies is that you have to get on the ground. You have to talk to military leaders, political leaders, even media to know what was happening then, what were the lessons learned or not learned from the operation as I make an objective assessment of the operation, which I think should be recorded in history and taught in warrior colleges around the world.
And why do you think Operation Sindoor should be taught in colleges across the world?
So many elements of it, from the tactical, operational, strategic. I mean, of course, the strategic, an entire nation has changed its doctrine towards responding to terrorism. You and I have talked in the past. I've studied the 26/11 Mumbai attacks, 2016, 2019. This is a strategic shift, a new doctrine, not just in responding to terrorism immediately, but also under this nuclear umbrella that has kind of paralyzed much of the world out of fear rather than leadership, as was shown during Operation Sindoor. It's like, look, we're going to not live in fear. We will respond in a limited fashion. Of course, I'm studying all the tactics that were, for everything from beyond visual range. Two nations aren't even near their own territory or their borders, and launching military superiority, not just in offensive capabilities like India demonstrated, but also in defensive capabilities.
Which again, India was able to demonstrate.
That's right.
So, since you drew this parallel between 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks in 2008, and you were here in India, you covered 26/11. In your appreciation, what have been the differences between 26/11, India's response or the lack of it, and post-Pahalgam Operation Sindoor?
Yeah, so after 26/11, it was a different world, but there was no response. There was an appeal to international community, a supposed sanction, negotiations of David Headley and Rana, which has been a recent development, which is amazing. But there's really no deterrence, no immediate response. Really, this military response sets a new standard on immediate response from any terrorist attack, really.
And these are two nuclear weapon countries.
That's right.
Both India and Pakistan declared nuclear weapon states using beyond visual range missiles. Has something like this happened anywhere in the world?
Not that I can track, and this has been very significant, not just the advancements in technologies and the ranges of these, from not just the missiles, but also the drones. It has to be studied, but also from what the goals are. A lot of people get confused about what wars are, or what they're not, what the goals should be versus what is done. India here, which I'll use to study, showed really leadership in communication. So from the first day after the awful terrorist attack, they showed leadership on, this is what we're responding, this is what we're hitting, this is why we're doing it, don't escalate. Pakistan escalated. And then that communication of the same message from the political leadership and the military leadership in democracies is really hard to do. Sometimes they're not on the same sheet of music, as we say. But that clarity was a big part of why Operation Sindoor was so direct, limited. India showed restraint. That'll be a part of the study as well, because we live in a world, you live in it more than I do, of information, narrative warfare, things like that. And communicating is so vital in war now.
So was India able to communicate that message? Because there are many commentators who say that India may have won the war on ground, strategic communications and messaging. Pakistan, perhaps initially at least, was a shade better.
No, I don't think so. So, with the evidence, right? So what we say, in God I trust, all others bring data. So India was able to, and when they're communicated, which was very unique when all the military commanders were there. Here's the satellite image of what we hit. Here's the crater. That level of bringing the evidence as well as communicating was very unique, and India dominated in that part.
It's interesting. What a beautiful line. In God I trust, everyone else bring data.
That's right.
And Pakistan brought absolutely no data of the bases it claimed it targeted. Perhaps, but they had more trust in America than God. Were you in a way? I know I'm digressing, but Pakistan reaching out to the United States of America, lunching at the White House, having that lunch at the White House. Does that take away from the international messaging if you want to, send across that message that a global state sponsor of terror will not be on the global high table? And sadly, Pakistan is, including United Nations Security Council, it's the chair.
Yeah. What I tell people is that geopolitics is very complex. Terrorism shouldn't be. And the message is very clear from this administration that terrorism is a unilateral, there is no double game here. So this is a new world, and I think Pakistan's waking up to the new world. Of course, the relationships, for whatever reason, they're complex. I don't think it detracts, and this is even with India's ability to communicate. Here are the calls that were made between Pakistan and India. That level of transparency, for me, kind of gets through the noise of what is other stories that aren't really the story.
Oh, that's very interesting. Oh, absolutely. So there is a lot of noise, but you've cut straight through the noise and gone down to facts on ground. What did you find in terms of, let's break this down. So Pakistani terrorists or terrorists backed by Pakistan, they attacked Hindu pilgrims. They chose Hindu pilgrims to kill in Pahalgam and massacred 25 of them. What did you find out from that point and beyond?
So one was, I don't think the rest of the world understands why this was called Operation Sindoor, that powder that recognizes an Indian married woman and the husbands that were lost on that awful day, and also children. I also found out that there's always an underlying reason, like why would they attack there now? And the development that India has been doing in Kashmir with 22 million tourists last year, and just the complete investment in the area, how that would be threatening to maybe a terrorist organization that wants to keep a certain status quo. So that's been an interesting part of understanding the precursor to Operation Sindoor, but there have been plenty of other ones.
And the messaging, the choosing of those 9 targets to hit.
That's right.
9 terrorist targets, including Muridke and Bahawalpur.
That's right.
What was your appreciation?
Was one that was different than the previous, right? So not outside of the line of control. These were strikes at a range, but also very clear messaging. These are terrorist locations. We're hitting them. The time that they were hitting deep at night to try to limit civilian casualties. A lot of lessons there. And then, of course, you see what the Pakistan response to that was to do that escalation. And in that phase was the immediate dominance, and I think even surprising to Indians, of how layered the air defenses was of India to stop a drone swarm, which in other parts of the world has shown as effective.
Interesting, you should point that out. You're right, the Akash Tir system, India's multi-layered air defense system, was able to stop the drones. You've covered conflict and you've been a part of conflict in Gaza.
Yep.
You've been in Gaza, you've
Ukraine.
you've been in Ukraine. And I've also reported both the Russia-Ukraine war in Ukraine for 2.5 months. I was there. But why is it that India was able to stop these incoming drones? Russia hasn't been able to do that in a big way. Israel, to an extent, hasn't been able to do that despite having the Iron Dome.
it's an interesting parallel. I was also in Nagorno-Karabakh between Azerbaijan and Armenia when really the drones started to be popular. There are reasons for each one, like the Iron Dome, and it is layered as well. But when you're taking drone swarms with cruise ballistic missiles in a swarm, 10%, 15% get through. That's still a lot in a very small area. I'm still looking at how India was able to show dominance with both legacy systems, so stuff that just shoots bullets in the air, with advanced systems.
The Zu-23s.
That's right. That's right.
The L-70s.
And I've done this before when talking to you. Like you're ahead of me, and I need to learn from you in some of these systems. But and the fact that the Indian military was practicing responding to drone attack before the drone attack. I think you've seen some of those interviews, which is, as an old soldier, that's important as well, because you can have capabilities, but you have to have training and practice and be ready for everything that comes at you. So I don't know all these exact technologies that were there, although India is developing laser technology that will be important for the rest of the world, because this counter-drone fight is a part of warfare. It isn't what people try to say is like everything about the future of warfare. It's a component that you have to account for, and clearly India did. Plus, with what I'm really looking at between 2019 and now is that Make in India, indigenous systems like Akash and BrahMos and other things that were a big part of the success of this operation.
Your appreciation of why the Pakistani system did not work, or the Chinese system did not work. What was your reading of this tango between the dragon and the Pakistanis?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and that was definitely a big part of this, right? Pakistan is basically a Chinese proxy with most of their equipment. Some people believe it's a degraded version of Chinese. I'm not so sure, but clearly India gave a masterclass not just on superior weapons, but also integration. Because just like in the air defense, Pakistan wasn't able to stop any Indian attack, any location. The radar and the air defense systems weren't, even if they were of quality, clearly they're not, they weren't integrated. So they weren't able to. So a lot of nuances there on those lessons, very specific to the system and why they didn't perform even as they were sold to perform.
That's a very critical point you make. You're absolutely right. So, while they have the HQ9s and the HQ16s and a lot more, they're not integrated. And a lot of their Western equipment does not speak to the Chinese equipment.
That's right.
So that's, again, a major problem with the Pakistanis, it seems.
Yep.
The decision-making in the country, what was your reading of that decision-making in the country at the political level and at the military level?
I think it's still learning and learned a lot since being on the ground, and this is why you have to come. In a democracy, that political leadership of the military is always a kind of sometimes a friction, but when it works together, it's very powerful. And that's what I see in this operation is clear objectives stated from the political and military and communication back and forth on what's going on. In order for a political leader to have basically clarity of message, he has to be informed on the military situation, be given best military advice for the decision on, okay, we got to respond, but here's our options. As of right now in my research, that synchronizing of the two, the political and the military, which is very important in a democracy where legitimacy and every aspect is also as important in keeping things contained, because you always have the voices of like, you got to hit them now, you get them, why are you stopping? And it's on the political leadership to say, no, this is our goal. This isn't about Pakistan, this isn't about the Pakistani people, it's about terrorism. That's why we chose these targets. So you see a lot of lessons here in that working together at the political military level.
Interesting. You're absolutely right. So 9 terrorist targets acquired and successfully, including Bahawalpur and Muridke. And since you were here post 2611, Bahawalpur and Muridke and some of the other targets in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, the armed forces had them in their target list even earlier. The political clearance never came to hit Bahawalpur and Muridke. It's the heart of Pakistan's Punjab province. I mean, that's striking the heart of the enemy.
Yeah. And you can't lead in fear. So there's that element. The world is different. So I can't criticize past governments. I can definitely assess this government, but I do historical research as well. And you have to know those differences here for sure.
True. Not criticizing past governments, but just think about the difference in action then and such strong action now. When you strike in the heart of the enemy, are you striking fear in the heart of the enemy? Is that the aim?
this has been the other aspect, again, why Operation Sindoor has to be studied, because war is an act of force to compel your enemy to do your will. Of course, you want Pakistan as an institution to stop with the proxy war of the terrorist organization. You can't get into the mind of every terrorist, but as a nation, you can definitely set a new doctrine, which is what's happened, that there will be overwhelming military response immediately. And that speed is important as well. As you saw for this operation compared to other ones, like 2019, that amount of time before a response and how quickly this is both the actions are happening, but also how fast it's contained. Yes, I think you've deterred and raised the deterrence level by controlling the escalation ladder. Am I saying you've deterred all terrorism? Unlikely, but you've definitely drew a line in the sand. And red lines only work when they're truly red lines.
Was Operation Sindoor a true red line for Pakistan in your appreciation?
I do. I think so. With the Prime Minister's very clear statements, there is no aspect of negotiation on we will respond with immediate force to any terrorist attack. We will not be blackmailed by nuclear threats, and which are reckless and nobody should be doing. I think both those aspects are very clear in establishing a new doctrine for India in general, not just this government.
So initially 9 terrorist targets were acquired, but that was the time that we are told that Pakistan was also prepared, and it succeeded in targeting, so we are told, some of our assets, some of our aircraft. Then the next day, India went and hit the enemy radar systems and multiple radar systems. Now we have many more details of where those radars were hit, and not restricted to any one part, but including in Pakistan's Punjab province and in the Sindh province in Karachi, Malir cantonment, for example, and went and hit 11 Pakistan Air Force bases. What do you make of those 11 Pakistan Air Force bases being hit, including, Noor Khan, Mushaf, Sargodha, Bulari, Jacobabad, Rahim Yar Khan, Skardu in Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir?
Yeah, I think what I make from it, again, I don't even have of course I'm learning, but the strategic decisions that had to be made on what targets and what message was being sent by that target. So location really mattered, and range, how far India can hit any target within Pakistan.
Sargodha has more than 200, close to 200 kilometers inside Pakistan.
And then what capability was it demonstrating? Like even your most advanced air defense radar and this basically defensive system will not work. So it was sending the message on multiple levels. So each one of those targets was a message and decided upon between the military, making a recommendation, political authorization for them. And the message, I think, was received quickly.
You think so?
I think so. They called and asked for whatever you want to call it, ceasefire or stopping the shooting. That's winning in warfare. When you compelled your enemy to do your will, which is stop escalating this operation. For whatever reason, now you seek political means, and I know the Indus Treaty and all that element of national power is a part of this, but you clearly sent a message because they called and asked for a halt.
You've studied Pakistan, and you've studied Pakistan post 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, because they massacred 166 people in Mumbai. I was there in Mumbai covering that massacre, and sadly it was terrible reporting that for 3 days, watching all those lives lost. And that glee, across, even though they claimed they carried out an investigation, but till date, they haven't taken any action against the perpetrators. In your appreciation, do you think the Pakistani military leadership, because even after 26/11, they continued to hit India, do you think after this incident, Operation Sindoor, will the Pakistani military leadership think twice, thrice, 4 times before it attempts another Pahalgam?
I think so. They'll definitely think through their decision making. Will that give up the institutional, basically, support as you see Pakistani generals attending terrorist funerals and making very problematic statements? There's always hope, but you got to be, pragmatic about it. Where you're right, after 26/11, after even this event, I think the world is more, for me, as a kind of a global war perspective, the world is paying attention. The world is paying attention, and the world is changing. What we see in Iran is also a part of this, that export of terrorism, the double game. I think all of these make even Pakistan rethink their strategies, will that change their deep-held, thoughts towards ideologies and things like that? Unlikely, but the cost of actions, the calculations are definitely different now.
And there's a saying. I mean, I've heard the Israelis use this often, that you have to keep mowing the grass.
Yes.
Because you've done it now, but it'll grow again, and you'll have terrorists striking you again. Maybe after 1 year, maybe after 2 years, maybe after 5 years. You need to keep striking. So is that your appreciation, that India will so initially 2016, after that Uri attack, there was a shallow surgical strike. Multiple locations, either side of Pir Panjal ranges, but there was one. After Pulwama, there was Balakot airstrike, one location targeted. But now there were like 11 air bases, 13 including radar stations, Navy on standby. You think India will keep escalating? That's the only way, escalating the response to Pakistani terror?
So I'm actually anti-war, even though I have a lot of job security because there is a lot of conflict around. Even India's this is what I'm here to learn, like what are the lessons that India will take from this? Not only how do you prevent it from happening again along the border security aspect, but also that strategic doctrine. So like the idea of preemptive strike. So no longer do you have to wait for attack. India says, well, if I see an imminent attack, then I will strike. That strategic independence that was shown during Sindoor is very vital as well. So it's hard to say, but clearly, yes, India will be even more prepared to respond immediately to make sure that that escalation dominance, as we say, can be controlled. And hopefully you get to the deterrence that you want. But even an idea of preemptiveness is new, right, for India.
What's the biggest message for Pakistan? What's the biggest lesson for Pakistan in your appreciation?
I think one of the biggest lessons for Pakistan, just having some bit of knowledge, is that you need to focus on your internal issues rather than talking about trying to take down other people. The inflation, the development that isn't there, things like that. You would hope that this, for all countries, we want human shared values. Like we want prosperity, we want development within our nation. And I know that right now that's kind of in turmoil in Pakistan. The message would be, take care of your people.
What's the message for China? Because I know you study urban warfare.
I do.
And, as a soldier, and America also studies China very closely.
Yeah.
What's the message for China in terms of their equipment, in terms of their training tactics? Because some have argued that a lot of what Pakistan did was Chinese satellite information, Chinese guidance, and Chinese tactics.
One is, I don't communicate to China much, but I mean, the message there is that they've learned their lessons from this operation on where their equipment failed, where their even ideals of what their own military could do, which is always, war is always a test of your military. And I've seen it from every military in the world. When they get put to the test and they falter, do they learn the right lessons? And I see that around the world. I'm not saying I'm hoping they learned their own lessons, but the message is there is that your equipment didn't do what it was sold to do.
As far as India is concerned, what would be the biggest takeaway from Operation Sindoor? I know the operations are still on, but the biggest takeaway?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the investment was worth the cost. So the investment in making India, those indigenous systems, and even the DRDO investments in innovation with the lasers and all that aspect was paying off. And so I know that, not my world, but they're going to continue that and get towards that 90% self-reliant and be the innovators, the data innovators in every technology, AI. This was the test of that investment and it paid off, so keep going.
Mm-hmm. And more standoff weapons, given the kind of, urban warfare is also changing. For decades, we were reporting close quarter combat. For decades in Jammu and Kashmir or in Mumbai 2611, for example, it was all, CQB operations.
It was.
But now, are we looking at more standoff weapons?
No.
And are we looking at, I don't want to use the word primacy because it'll lead to a conflict between the Army and the Air Force and the Navy, but are we looking at more effective use of air power and missile power?
So no is the answer. And as an old infantry guy, not just because I was infantry, but even the DJAO said, look, this system was only able to be as effective because of the joint operations, because of the Navy, the air, ground systems, the Army systems. And the one lesson of all warfare around the globe is stop trying to shrink your militaries to nothing, relying on only technology. That's a bad lesson that countries have to relearn. you have to invest in defense. And that includes having ground forces, because you can't take and hold ground or defend ground without ground forces. No technology is going to save you there. So they definitely no. But this is what Sindoor is about. Sindoor is about integration of joint capabilities, and they synchronized it better than the enemy did. And that showed dominance. So you have to keep that up. But you can't think that technology is going to make things cheaper on the ground forces. You need it all.
Oh, what a brilliant solution. Oh, I completely agree with you, because I've been on ground.
Yeah.
I've spent time with the air defense people, and you're absolutely right, because every inch has to be protected. Any chink in your armor, the enemy will exploit.
That's right.
So you need to have that network-centric warfare with troops on ground to be able to effectively guide those weapons to take down the incoming threat.
Yeah, all aspects of it. So I don't believe in a world of robotic warfare. It's still the world of hard men and women. And I know that Operation Sindoor highlighted some of the women warriors.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
On the front lines.
That's right.
The front lines.
You need hard women and men doing hard things to dominate in battle.
Oh, that's a brilliant lesson. You're right. So in the Army Air Defense, one of our very strategic vital assets, Pakistan had tried to target it, and it used a lot of high-speed missiles. It used its drones. It used a lot of other stuff coming in. And there was this lady officer of Army Air Defense, and she was guiding her weapons to counter some of them. And, from the World War era Zu-23 ACAC gun,
Yep,
to the L-70, to the Shilkas, to the latest Akash missiles, everything was being used simultaneously in that operation.
And it only happens through a lot of training. So that moment of success only came after hours and hours of training and training and training more. And I even saw that within in India in general, talking about how right after the terrorist attack, they were still drilling for like incoming drones.
Yes.
All of that, you only get this dominance and this good performance through hours and hours of hard work.
What future do you see of warfare in this region? And since you were in Ukraine, you're looking at the Russia-Ukraine war. And now I want to move international. I want to ask you about Israel and Iran, Israel and Hamas. But first, Russia and Ukraine. Do you see intensification there?
Absolutely, because I believe that, there are things that are worth fighting and dying for, like sovereign borders, freedom. So in that case, but it at the scale that most people can't comprehend, 1 million plus men and women on both sides, static lines, but there are also differences and variations of breakthroughs. War is always a contest of will. And if anybody tries to come on your show and predict the future of that, then just throw them out, because there's so many variations. The European Union investing and matching certain investments in Ukraine's. I believe personally, from the history of war, that freedom and democracy and things like that are worth fighting for. So I don't like when people say, what are they dying for? It's a an intractable situation. The lines are frozen, all of that junk at this time. But Ukraine's fighting for its freedom. Russians are fighting for what Putin says they're fighting for. I don't agree with those, but as a warfare analyst, I understand why the lines are the way they are, why the drones are so pervasive, because both sides don't have air supremacy. I can't tell you where it's going to go. Hopefully it ends soon, but nobody knows.
And again, in Israel and Iran, and Israel and Hamas, two different conflicts that are happening simultaneously, and Houthis still continue to pipe in. You see an escalation there too, because Israel, with all its might and American support, hasn't been able to put Iran down and out.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, again, and it coincided with Sindoor on helping people understand the difference between limited goals in a war and an unlimited goal. In the war against Hamas after the awful terrorist attack of October 7th, and there's so many similarities here globally, like how awful and vicious these terrorist attacks are, yet the goal is to take Hamas out of power in that territory, take all their military capability. That's really hard for any military to do, let alone while you're fighting Hezbollah, the Houthis, Shia-backed militias in Iraq. As Syria starts to fall apart.
Then Assad regime,
the Assad regime. But with Iran, the goal was very limited. The another terrorist regime with a nuclear weapon the entire world doesn't want. Israel acted preemptively and achieved a limited success in stopping them from getting a nuclear war immediately. Doesn't mean anything's over, but there was dominance shown equally, and the objective was shown there. While Israel still has a lot to happen, but there's already talk of a possible hostage deal going on, as we might see this week, or if not, I mean, Israel's got to continue that operation, and it takes time.
So is this the future of warfare, that you have limited goals? You set a limited goal and you achieve it, and then you leave it for another day for that decisive action. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm trying to help people understand that each war has its own context and has its own goals. It is and we say this in America, right? Because there's people that have ideals about the legacy of Iraq and Afghanistan. When you have a goal and then the goal changes,
yes,
and you don't have a path towards that goal, there is that aspect of war. The future is that only the dead have known the end of war, unfortunately. Yeah. But there is this element of, I do believe in peace through strength. And what we're seeing in the last 3+4 years is a unraveling of the global international order, the standards, sovereign lines, and proxy warfare being allowed to continue, that you have a reestablishment of that. So we may see an era of peace that we haven't had because of a lot of failed foreign policy up to this moment.
Very interesting. You say peace through strength.
Absolutely.
Has India been able to display that strength in Operation Sindoor?
Absolutely. And I think it's so many elements of strategic leadership on what does that mean? What does that mean? Some people try to say that it means just no fighting at all. No, it means if you are strong, it deters violence against you, so you have a peace. Absolutely, India put themselves on a path to send that message, which will lead to more peace, but also signal that there will be a cost. Again, and it's really hard for non-people like us that have studied war for a long time to understand, like, you have to be violent at times to get people to achieve the peace that you want.
You have to be violent to achieve peace.
Yes.
And India was able to achieve that to an extent, that sent across the message that if need be, we will be violent, we will hurt you if it takes us towards our goal for peace.
Absolutely. If not, the operation wouldn't have ended so quickly. I mean, two nuclear armed nations going at each other, but being able to demonstrate that deterrence only works if you have the capability and the will to use it. So we saw kind of internationally, even after these terror attacks in India, a lack of will for many reasons, fear sometimes, or just diplomatic concerns. You have to have the capability as well to do it at a certain speed and force that is convincing to your enemy.
And India has that.
India did that.
And Pakistan got that message.
They definitely got it in this operation. Now, we'll see. Nobody can predict. I think this sets the standard for more deterrence is what you want, and then change of strategic doctrine.
Is the world also appreciating India's message? Has Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his team been able to convey that message? Because this is something that India is repeatedly trying to tell the world. Pakistan's state-sponsored radical Islamist terror is unacceptable.
I think, and there's stuff going on, I know, in the foreign minister and the prime minister on trips right now. I think that message was not only sent, but it's being reiterated multiple times that this is the new India, but also the development goals. There's so much promise going on, and not just in the aspect of deterring terrorism, but also in development, which will bring strength. Your greatest strength is your allies. You have to have strategic independence, of course, but all of these initiatives that are growing India are part of building India stronger and stronger, with each initiative, really.
At West Point or any other location, what would you be teaching your students about Operation Sindoor?
One is being able to objectively state the facts of what was happening, what caused it with the terrorist attack, and then each iteration, because sometimes we try to, so much is going on in the world that we're missing these lessons and why it's different. I have good case studies, which actually Mumbai 2008 is a bad case study for the investments that allowed for the vulnerability, the response and disintegration. This will be a very positive case study at the highest level, two nuclear armed nations, and showing what right looks like in strategic communication, leadership, capability dominance, escalation dominance, a very positive case study to teach.
Colonel John Spencer, it's always such a pleasure talking to you, and I'm so sorry that this conversation is so short, but hopefully we'll have you back with us again for many, many, many more such conversations.
We must do it.
Great talking to you.
Nice talking to you.